Chapter 1. The Illusion of Bond. Why we call strangers friends. Most people you call a friend are strangers dressed in familiarity. That is the first uncomfortable truth. They are strangers who happen to appear in your timeline at the same moment life needed companionship. Strangers who shared your classroom, your office desk, your neighborhood street, your social feeds. Strangers who filled the empty spaces of your life simply because they were there. Jung believed that the ego confuses proximity with intimacy, repetition with loyalty, and attention with connection. The mind takes whatever is close and turns it into something meaningful, not because it truly is, but because we are terrified of standing alone. Think about how most friendships begin. You didn't select this person with depth, intention, or psychological clarity. You didn't study their values, their worldview, their hidden motives, their moral code. You didn't observe how they treat people weaker than them, how they react to envy, or how they behave when the spotlight is not on them. They sat behind you in a classroom. They worked at the desk next to yours. They lived down the street. You laughed at the same joke. You shared the same food. And slowly, without any real conscious choice, the brain whispered, "This is my friend." But what makes a person a friend? Is it shared environment? Or shared soul? Is it shared routine? Or shared truth? Most people never ask these questions. They accept whoever life places near them because the instinct to bond is older than the instinct to be authentic. The ancient animal in us needs the tribe to feel safe. The tribe reduces vigilance. The tribe offers comfort, even when that tribe is just a random collection of individuals you met accidentally. Jung said that the ego builds its identity by reflecting itself through others. So we surround ourselves with people not because they are compatible with our inner world, but because they mirror the parts of ourselves we already know. They validate the character we are comfortable playing. The problem is, the character is not the self. The persona is not the soul. Here is the paradox. The friend you believe knows you only knows your visible layer, the acceptable, polished, socially presentable mask. The part you allow the world to see, the part that laughs when it should, agrees when it must, and hides the heaviness inside your mind. So the friendship becomes a relationship between two masks, not two human beings. Two personas interacting politely, calling each other friends, without ever meeting the deeper, messier reality underneath. This is why most friendships dissolve the moment life changes context. Remove the classroom, the friendship evaporates. Remove the office, and the person who called you brother disappears. Remove the mutual benefit, and the bond reveals its emptiness. If the relationship requires environment to survive, it is not a friendship. It is a circumstance. People don't like to admit this because it exposes how fragile their social world really is. We like the idea of having many friends, of being socially wanted, surrounded by familiar faces. It protects the ego from the terrifying realization that connection is rare and that most of what we call friendship is a strategy against psychological isolation, not love, not loyalty. Strategy. Jung was clinical about this. In his view, most friendships exist to hold the ego together, to prevent collapse into the unconscious, into the shadow, into the loneliness where one must confront the truth of who they are when nobody is watching. So we reach for people. We cling to familiar faces, even if they are not truly compatible with us. Even if the bond is shallow, unexamined, and easily broken. Watch what happens when one person grows. When you change your habits, your goals, your mindset, the casual friendships start to feel heavy. You feel a distance you can't explain, not because you dislike them, but because the bond was built on old versions of you, versions that no longer exist. The relationship was tied to the environment, the routine, the mutual stagnation. Growth changes the equation. You stop playing the same character, and the other person loses their reflection. They stop recognizing you because they never met the real you, only the version you played. This is why real friendship demands intentional recognition, a conscious decision to say, "I see your character, I see your shadow, I see your path, and I choose to walk with you anyway." Not because we share a classroom, not because we work in the same building, not because loneliness needs a witness, but because our internal worlds resonate, even when our environments don't. Real friendship requires discernment, something society rarely teaches. You have to be able to ask hard questions. Does this person support truth or comfort? Do they celebrate my growth or my passivity? Do they feel threatened by my ambition? Do they introduce me to new parts of myself, or are they just another repetition of my past? Fake friendships survive because nobody asks these questions. We assume closeness equals connection. We assume shared laughter equals loyalty. We assume familiar faces equals safe hearts. We lower our psychological defenses in the presence of strangers we call friends. Jung believed that the human mind projects ideal qualities onto others to make relationships feel meaningful. We don't see people. We invent stories about them. We fill the silence with assumptions. He's loyal. She understands me. They care. But the truth is, we don't know. Most people have never seen their friends under pressure, under envy, under betrayal, under the weight of your success. You haven't seen who they become when life tests the foundation of the bond. And when the test comes, many disappear. Not out of malice, but because nothing real ever existed to hold them in place. The truth is both painful and liberating. Most friendships are temporary mirrors, reflections of phases you moved through, reflections of stages of your identity, reflections of who you were in a certain environment. The people were not fake. The bond was. It was an illusion woven by the need to belong, the desire to avoid isolation, and the psychological safety that comes from calling a familiar face a friend without ever understanding their internal world. To build real friendship, you have to first meet yourself. You must go through the silence, the separation, the uncomfortable process of individuation, where the ego breaks its dependence on external validation. Only then can you recognize another individual not as a mirror or a mask, but as a whole world, a person with their own dreams, their own shadows, their own truth. Until then, most friendships will remain what they began as: two strangers who met by accident, calling each other friends to survive the loneliness of becoming human. Chapter 2. Social Masks. The persona that makes friendship artificial. There is a version of you that walks through the world like armor. It smiles when required. It nods in public. It gives polite answers, safe opinions, harmless jokes. It adapts. It survives. Jung called this mask the persona, the image the ego builds to be accepted by society. Most friendships are built between personas, not people. Two masks shaking hands. Two performances calling each other friends. The persona is not a lie. It is a survival mechanism. We wear it because the world punishes the unfiltered self. You learned this early. The child who expressed themselves honestly was told to be quiet. The teenager who revealed fear was mocked. The adult who showed ambition was called arrogant. So, you adjusted. You learned to contour yourself to the room. You became socially correct. You became the version that causes the least friction. That is where artificial friendship begins. Not in deception, but in self-protection. Most people never reveal their interior world to their friends. The dreams they barely whisper to themselves. The insecurity that shapes their choices. The resentment they hide under humor. The envy they bury in silence. The wild ambitions that contradict the image they present. Instead, they present a manageable identity. A lighter, safer version of their truth. The persona is a contract with the environment. I will hide parts of myself if you accept what remains. Now imagine two people doing this at the same time. Their bond becomes a negotiation of masks, a delicate choreography where each one senses what is acceptable and edits themselves to maintain harmony. They call this friendship, but harmony is not intimacy. Agreement is not understanding. Connection is not performance. This is why a person can spend years with someone and still feel unseen. Fake friendship is rarely malicious. It is unconscious. People don't want to reveal their shadow because they fear rejection. The shadow, the darker, unfiltered impulses we deny, feels dangerous to show. Jealousy, competition, desire for validation, fear of insignificance, the existential insecurity that keeps us up at night. The persona hides it all and presents a human that looks stable, predictable, socially elegant, a character the group can accept. But when you hide your truth, the friendship only knows your mask, not your identity. You are loved for the role you play, not the person you are. This is why so many friendships feel exhausting without clarity as to why. You have to perform every moment you are together. You stay within narrow emotional boundaries. You play by unwritten rules. Don't challenge too deeply. Don't reveal too much. Don't shine too brightly. Don't think too differently. You become smaller to keep the bond intact. This is the paradox. The persona creates connection but prevents closeness. The mask lets friendships form easily, polite, smooth, comfortable, but it blocks the path to depth. The persona wants approval, not intimacy. It protects the ego from vulnerability, but vulnerability is the only condition where true friendship can appear. Jung believed that most conflicts in relationships come from identity confusion. Each person believes they are interacting with a real friend, but in truth, they are interacting with the projection of a friend, the imagined personality created by observing the persona, the surface, the visible layer, the curated image. This is why sudden disappointments happen. One day the person drops their mask. Anger reveals itself. Insecurity bursts through. Jealousy emerges, and the friendship cracks. You say, "I never expected this from them." But you never knew them. You only knew their persona. This is also why friendships collapse under pressure. Stress breaks the mask. Crisis exposes who a person really is, whether they are loyal when nothing is offered in return, whether they can celebrate your success without calculating their own value, whether they can sit with your pain without trying to fix their discomfort. The persona cannot do those things. It was built to manage impressions, not to handle truth. Think about how most friendships operate. You know what topics are safe. You know what to avoid. You know which dreams are acceptable to share. You know when to dim yourself so the other person doesn't feel threatened. You know when to pretend you don't care about something deeply because it might disrupt the emotional balance. That is persona management. You can spend 10 years in a friendship like this, familiar yet shallow, warm yet fragile, comfortable but never transformational. And then, when you show a piece of your real self, a truth that doesn't fit the established image, the other person withdraws. They don't know what to do with a version of you that isn't edited for them. The question is, why do we accept this? Because artificial friendship is easy. It requires no self-awareness, no confrontation with the shadow, no risk. We exchange approval like currency. We mirror each other to maintain comfort. We complement each other to reinforce identity. Everyone feels validated, but nobody grows. To build real friendship, you would have to take the mask off. Slowly, painfully, intentionally. You would have to reveal your shadow and allow another person to witness you without editing. You would have to see their shadow too. Not judge it, not fix it, not pretend it isn't there, but understand it. You would have to become someone who can hold truth without fear. Most people never reach this stage because they don't even know themselves. The persona has been worn for so long that it became fused with identity. They confuse their mask with their soul. They think they are the character they learned to play. That is why Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate." People think their friendships just happen. They do not. They are built by the persona. An unconscious architect designing relationships around the avoidance of discomfort. When people say, "I just didn't feel a connection," what they often mean is, "I didn't feel mirrored in the way my persona expected." Imagine entering a room without a mask. You speak truth, not correctness. You share ambition without apology. You reveal fear without shame. You show love without performance. Some people would not stay, but the ones who do, those are your friends. Real friendship is maskless recognition, one soul seeing another without the need to pretend. The bond is not based on the persona, but on the self, the deeper identity that exists beneath the projections, beneath the social roles, beneath the fragments of image management. Two people who can exist without performance. That is rare. There is a reason true friendship feels like a mirror made of honesty instead of approval. It forces growth. It exposes you to your own limits. It holds your contradictions. It challenges the persona until it breaks. And when it breaks, the friendship either dissolves or becomes real. Most friendships never reach that stage. They remain in the safe zone of image, politeness, compatibility of masks. They are not evil or fake in the malicious sense. They are fake because the people involved never met themselves. You can only be loved to the depth you are willing to reveal yourself. You can only know another person to the depth you are willing to drop your mask. Until then, the persona will continue to build your relationships, and you will continue calling strangers friends. Chapter 3. The Shadow in Friendship. Hidden Motives Nobody Admits. Every friendship has two stories, the one we speak and the one we conceal. The one in the open world, polite laughter, soft promises, warm introductions, and the one buried underneath, where the unconscious calculates value, protects insecurity, and hides what we are afraid to admit even to ourselves. Jung called this hidden engine of human behavior the shadow, the dark reservoir of motives, desires, fears, and impulses we deny. We present friendship as selfless, pure, and unconditional, but the shadow whispers the truth. Most relationships are exchanges we disguise with the language of loyalty. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of the psyche that carries everything the persona rejects. The envy you pretend you don't feel, the jealousy you hide behind compliments, the competitiveness buried under support, the insecurity disguised as advice, the quiet resentment disguised as silence. These are not accidents. They are symptoms of the unconscious trying to protect the ego from feeling inferior or forgotten. Friendship on the surface appears noble. I'm here for you. You can count on me. We're in this together. But beneath the surface lies the internal negotiation. Will you be there for me later? Does supporting you make me important? Will you remember this? Will I lose something if you change? Am I safe if you outgrow me? We rarely speak these questions, but they are alive in the shadow. That is why the most painful betrayals in friendship are not about words. They are about the unspoken contracts we never admitted existed. Each person carries an internal list of expectations they call love. When those expectations are broken, the shadow appears. Anger, withdrawals, coldness, silent punishment. Not because cruelty awakened, but because the hidden transaction was violated. The shadow also defines how quickly we form relationships. Everyone loves the beginning of a friendship, the similarity, the shared jokes, the feeling of being understood. But similarity is not depth, it is recognition. The shadow is satisfied because the other person mirrors our identity, our views, our experiences, our wound patterns. We mistake shared pain for compatibility and shared opinions for psychological alignment. It feels safe because it is familiar. Most friendships are built on some form of self-comfort. You make me feel seen. You make me feel valuable. You make me feel less alone. That is a human need, but it is also a hidden motive. You are not drawn to the person. You are drawn to the version of yourself you feel in their presence. The shadow selects relationships based on emotional economics, not honesty. It searches for value, people we can lean on, compare with, feel significant around. We call it connection, but it is often psychological barter. Jung said that to see the shadow, you must observe the reactions that feel disproportionate. The moment a friend succeeds beyond our imagination, something moves inside. Something subtle, tight, quiet. Not hatred, but displacement. You are suddenly aware of your own limitations. You see your reflection in their achievement and feel the gap. Instead of celebration, you feel comparison. Instead of pride, you feel distance. You hide it with praise. But the shadow knows. The unconscious begins counting. This is why success destroys fake friendships. The shadow loses its quiet advantage. The bond was built on equality. Equality of weakness, equality of limitation, equality of insecurity. When one person rises, the psychological equilibrium breaks. The other person is forced to confront the truth. They were attached to the version of you that validated their comfort. Now you threaten their identity. The shadow also appears in small acts of friendship that feel generous but are driven by need. Listening to someone's pain not out of compassion, but because it gives us a sense of moral superiority. Giving advice because it reinforces our role as the wise one. Supporting someone's dream because it keeps them close. We rarely ask, would I still do this if I expected nothing in return? That is how you measure the difference between friendship and a hidden contract. Even kindness can be transactional, not because people are manipulative, but because they are unaware of the motives beneath their actions. Jung said that the unconscious does not ask for permission. It moves us, speaks through us, shapes our relationships without our understanding. We think we are honest, but we are honest only to the extent the ego can tolerate. The shadow shapes how we choose friends, but also how we lose them. When someone stops feeding the need we built the bond on, validation, agreement, familiarity. The shadow withdraws. Suddenly, the person feels annoying. Suddenly, they talk too much about themselves. Suddenly, their presence takes energy instead of giving it. Nothing changed externally. Only the hidden motive lost its payoff. That is why friendships end abruptly, without explanation, without closure. The unconscious motive is gone and the persona cannot explain why. So we say, we grew apart. The shadow says, they no longer gave me what my identity needed. If we were honest, we would admit that loyalty in friendship is tested when there is nothing to gain, when supporting someone offers no advantage, when helping them might even cost you something: time, comfort, status, safety. In that moment, you see the shadow clearly. It reveals whether the bond is built on love or need. The shadow is also behind the subtle sabotage that occurs in relationships where one person fears being left behind. They offer discouragement disguised as logic. They minimize ambition disguised as concern. They highlight flaws disguised as honesty. They keep you small because small makes them feel secure. Large threatens the bond. This is why the greatest threat to a fragile friendship is authentic individuality. The moment you become yourself, without shrinking, the shadow panics. It senses abandonment in independence. It senses insignificance in your growth. It senses loss of identity in your transformation. True friendship requires something rare. Two people who have confronted their own shadow, who can see their hidden motives without letting them control the relationship. People who can feel envy and still choose love. People who can feel comparison and still celebrate. People who can feel insecurity and still support. That is the discipline. That is the test. Jung was clear. There is no purity in friendship until the shadow is known. The bond is not real until both sides understand why they need each other and choose each other even after the motives are exposed. That choice, conscious, intentional, honest, transforms the relationship from psychological exchange to soulful connection. People think the shadow ruins friendships. It doesn't. Silence does. Denial does. Pretending we are perfectly noble creatures does. Real intimacy begins when we say without judgment, I feel envy sometimes. I feel fear sometimes. I feel threatened sometimes. But I choose you anyway. That is the moment the persona falls. That is the moment the unconscious becomes conscious. That is the moment a stranger becomes a friend. Until then, we are all negotiating with our hidden motives, calling the contracts love and hiding the shadow behind the nicest words we know. Chapter 4. Emotional dependency. The main reason people cling to fake friendships. Most people don't fear loneliness itself. They fear who they become when there is nobody around to distract them from their inner world. That is the truth behind friendship that almost nobody admits. We use each other as protection, not from danger, but from introspection. What society calls friendship is often a complex architecture built to avoid a single terrifying moment, sitting with oneself, unfiltered, without noise, without witnesses. Jung believed that emotional dependency is not a side effect of friendship. It is the very mechanism keeping fake friendships alive. The human mind is wired to seek connection because, for thousands of years, isolation meant death. The tribe was survival. Rejection was exile. Being alone triggered the oldest anxiety in our nervous system, the fear of being unprotected. Even today, in a world where physical danger is minimal, the psyche still responds as if separation will destroy us. So we cling to people, not because we truly know them, but because their presence keeps our inner chaos quiet. Emotional dependency is subtle. It does not announce itself. It dresses itself as loyalty. It calls itself love. It wraps itself in the language of support. I need you. I'm here for you. Don't leave me behind. But beneath that sweetness is the truth. You fill a void inside me that I refuse to face alone. The friendship becomes emotional anesthesia, a painkiller protecting the mind from its own depths. Dependency turns friendship into a need, not a choice. The person is not loved because of who they are, but because of the role they play in stabilizing the ego. They become a mirror in which we see ourselves as worthy, interesting, needed. We attach to the feeling, not the person. That is why so many friendships become unbearable when one person begins to change. Change threatens the emotional contract, the unwritten rule. Remain who I need you to be, so I don't have to face myself. Fake friendships operate on this invisible agreement. They are agreements to stay small together, agreements to avoid growth together, agreements to keep life familiar and comfortable. Emotional dependency requires stagnation because growth forces the mind to ask the questions dependency cannot survive. Who am I without this person? Who am I without this group? Am I enough alone? Most people don't want those answers, so they surround themselves with noise, constant contact, endless talking, shared hobbies, shared routines. Every hour filled with interaction is one less hour where the unconscious might speak. The tribal instinct disguises itself as modern friendship, but the psychology is ancient. I exist because others see me. I matter because the group confirms it. Jung believed that the path to individuation, becoming your true self, requires separation, not permanent isolation, but the courage to step away from the collective long enough to hear your own mind. That is why individuation often destroys superficial friendships. The moment you begin to build an internal identity, external identities lose their power. You stop needing validation. You stop seeking approval. You stop using people as mirrors. And the people who depended on your dependency feel threatened. Dependency makes the smallest distance feel like betrayal. When one person pulls away to grow, the other person feels abandoned, even if nothing was taken from them. They interpret the evolution as rejection. You don't need me anymore. In truth, the friendship was built on mutual emotional reassurance, not authentic connection. The collapse is not personal. It is structural. Look closely at how dependency shapes behavior in fake friendships. People avoid saying the truth because they fear losing the role they hold. They soften their ambition because ambition creates distance. They suppress discomfort because confrontation risks separation. They laugh at things they don't find funny, agree to things they don't believe, follow choices they don't want. All because the relationship is not built on honest alignment, but on the fear of being alone. Think about the times you stayed in friendships that drained you. Why didn't you leave? Not because of love, but because walking away meant facing the quiet, facing the realization that the bond was not real, facing the chance that you may not have anyone to fill the space they occupied. That space is not external, it is a space inside you. Dependency convinces the mind that any company is better than silence, that a fake friend is better than no friend, that shallow connection is safer than solitude. This is why people tolerate betrayal, broken trust, disrespect. Anything is acceptable as long as it prevents the terror of psychological isolation. Loneliness becomes the enemy, but loneliness is not the enemy. It is the gateway. Jung wrote that the individual must enter solitude to discover the self, the deeper identity hidden beneath the persona and the shadow. When you remove external attachments, the unconscious rises. It forces you to confront questions you avoided through social activity. It forces you to build your own values instead of barring others. Dependency collapses not because the other person left you, but because you finally came to meet yourself. Real friendship is impossible while dependency is active, because dependency cannot tolerate honesty. Honesty risks loss. Dependency cannot tolerate growth. Growth changes roles. Dependency cannot tolerate individuality. Individuality breaks the illusion of unity. In emotional dependency, the other person becomes a psychological crutch, not a partner in evolution. Pay attention to how often people confuse closeness with ownership. Where close becomes you belong to me emotionally. We understand each other becomes you owe me consistency. The friendship becomes a symbol the ego defends, not a living relationship between two souls becoming themselves. Dependency also explains why people feel threatened by a friend's silence. When someone stops sharing every detail of their life, the dependent friend feels excluded. When someone starts spending time alone, they feel unwanted. When someone sets boundaries, they interpret it as aggression, not because the behavior is hostile, but because their security was tied to being needed. This is why emotional dependency destroys the possibility of authentic connection. A real friend is not afraid of your solitude. They do not panic when you grow. They do not collapse when you change roles. They do not view your independence as abandonment. They understand that your individuality is the foundation of the friendship, not a threat to it. Fake friendships cling to each other because they cannot stand alone. Real friendships stand together because both people learned how to stand alone first. People think they are protecting the friendship by staying close, But what they are really protecting is their dependence on the emotional structure the friendship provides. That structure is fragile. It becomes heavy, suffocating, desperate. Every small shift becomes a crisis. Every silence becomes rejection. Every boundary becomes betrayal. But when you remove dependency, something powerful appears: choice. You choose the person not because they fill a void, but because you admire their journey. You share time not because you fear loneliness, but because their presence expands your world. You support them not to ensure they support you later, but because their growth inspires yours. That is the transformation. The bond shifts from need to respect, from fear to freedom, from attachment to alignment. Individuation teaches you that being alone is not a punishment. It is a revolution. When you face yourself, friendships change shape. Most will fall away, not because they were evil, but because they were built on dependency you no longer carry. What remains will be rare, a relationship between two whole minds, not two incomplete identities holding each other together. Emotional dependency keeps fake friendships alive, but freedom, the internal strength to walk alone, births the only kind of friendship that deserves the name. Chapter 5. The Collapse of Fake Bonds. When success reveals real loyalty, people think failure tests friendships. But failure is easy to love. A broken person is safe. They do not threaten our identity. They do not outpace us. They do not expose the parts of our life we forgot to build. When someone loses everything, we can feel generous without risk. The hand we extend becomes a symbol of our virtue. The comfort we give becomes currency for our ego. It makes us feel strong, wise, needed. Failure creates a hierarchy where support is rewarded with significance. That is why many friendships thrive in weakness. The shadow is comfortable there. But success changes everything. Success is dangerous because success redraws the map of identity. Suddenly, the person you knew rises above the boundaries that used to hold you together. They become something new, a vision of potential you have not reached. They no longer reflect the same psychological image that made the friendship easy. And that, Jung believed, is where the real test begins. Can you love someone who no longer validates your limitations? Most friendships are built on equality, not economic equality, but emotional equality. Equality of weakness, equality of dreams, equality of fear. You share a similar size of life. You are walking side by side through the desert of uncertainty, dreaming together, complaining together, waiting for your turn together. The fantasy of we will rise together protects the bond, a shared delusion that success will arrive like a storm and carry both of you upward with identical force. But reality is never that symmetrical. One person rises first, and the moment one person rises, the bond changes shape. At first, you imagine celebration. You expect joy. You think the friend will shout your name with pride. You think your success will be a shared victory. But instead, something subtle happens. A slight shift in tone, a quiet distance, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. It is not overt hostility. It is internal collapse. The other person is mourning a version of you that no longer exists. The version that was safe. The version that made them feel equal. Success is a mirror, and mirrors are merciless. They reflect not only who you have become, but who the other person has not. Your growth becomes evidence of their stagnation. Your discipline becomes evidence of their excuses. Your courage becomes evidence of their fear. They do not resent you. They resent what you reveal. And so the friendship begins to fracture, not through conflict, but through quiet comparison. This is the tragic irony. The friend who encouraged your dreams may not survive your accomplishments. They loved the dream because the dream was harmless. It had no shape. It demanded nothing of them. But the moment the dream becomes reality, it creates distance. Reality divides what fantasy unified. People rarely talk about this because it feels ungrateful to admit. We are taught to believe friendship is unconditional. We want to trust that bonds are pure. But Jung knew better. He warned that most relationships are held together by the imagined balance of identities. When that balance breaks, the truth appears. You can see it in the smallest behaviors, the jokes that suddenly carry a sting, the advice disguised as discouragement. Be careful. Don't change too much. Remember who you are. What they really mean is, remember who you were. The version that made me comfortable, They start listing your flaws, not to help, but to reduce the size of your achievement. They mention your mistakes like warnings. They try to keep you close by pulling you down. None of this is conscious. It is the shadow defending the ego. Jung described this as the betrayal of projection. The friend projected an image onto you, maybe a brother, an equal, a partner in the struggle, and your growth destroys that image. They must face the truth that you are your own person, separate from their narrative. Your success kills the myth the friendship was built on, that two paths can remain identical forever. Many friendships collapse quietly after this point. The phone stops ringing. The invitations become rare. The conversations shrink. Every interaction becomes a comparison of worlds, your forward momentum versus their repetition. The bond decays into nostalgia. Memories of who you used to be become the only safe place. They say things like, "You've changed," but the real meaning is, "You became someone I'm not prepared to meet." In truth, the friendship did not collapse because of success. It collapsed because it was built on shared limitation rather than shared vision, shared struggle rather than shared growth, shared comfort rather than shared courage. Real loyalty is not proven in failure. It is proven in evolution. The friend who stands beside you when you become unrecognizable, that is the friend who loved you. The one who celebrates your distance, who is inspired by it instead of threatened, who allows your path to diverge without demanding you fit into their story. That is the one who understood what friendship means. They do not need you to stay small to stay close. A mature mind understands that loving someone means letting them grow beyond you. It means admiring the horizon they walk toward instead of dragging them back into familiar terrain. It means allowing their success to expand your world instead of shrinking your identity. There is a depth in friendship that can survive transformation, but it is rare. Jung would say it requires two individuals who have confronted their own shadow. Without that confrontation, the shadow reacts unconsciously. Jealousy turns into criticism. Insecurity turns into distance. Disappointment turns into resentment. But when the shadow is known, something different happens. The friend sees your growth as a mirror, not of their failure, but of their potential. This is the point where fake bonds collapse and real bonds are born. When success enters the picture, a fake friend asks, "What does this mean for me?" A real friend asks, "What does this mean for you?" A fake friend panics about their identity. A real friend celebrates yours. A fake friend sees your rise as a threat. A real friend sees your rise as proof that rising is possible. Success reveals loyalty because success exposes motive. You see who loved the comfort and who loved the person. You see who loved the idea of equality and who loved the truth of your individuality. You see who only stayed because your limitations were convenient and who stays because your evolution is beautiful. The hardest part of growth is not the discipline, not the sacrifice, not the loneliness. It is the moment you realize that some people loved only the weaker version of you. They loved the version that needed them, and your strength becomes the reason they withdraw. Let them. You are not obligated to remain small so others feel safe. You are not responsible for protecting someone from their own shadow. Growth will cost you the friendships that were never real and reward you with bonds that were unimaginable. The collapse is painful, but it is purification. What leaves was never meant to stay. What stays was never dependent on who you used to be. Success does not change people. It reveals them. And what it reveals is the rare treasure hidden beneath the collapse. The friend who stands in the light of your transformation without flinching, without envy, without ownership. The one who says, "Go further, even if it means walking alone for a while." That is loyalty. That is love. That is the friendship that ends the cycle of fake bonds, the moment where two paths diverge and one soul whispers to the other, "I will meet you on the mountain." Chapter 6. The Rarity of Real Friendship. Conscious connection between two awake minds. Real friendship is so rare that most people will go through life believing they have found it a dozen times, only to realize they never touched it once. Not because the world is empty or people are cruel, but because conscious connection is impossible between unconscious minds. Jung believed that authentic friendship is an act of evolution, a meeting between two individuals who have walked through their own internal fire, confronted their shadow, dismantled their persona, and returned with a self that is not borrowed, not inherited, not shaped by the crowd. Most never make that journey, which means most relationships stay on the surface, echoes of comfort rather than reflections of truth. To understand the rarity of real friendship, you must understand how most friendships form. We meet when the masks are on. We introduce ourselves through persona, curated identity, acceptable personality traits, stories polished to entertain rather than reveal. Two masks shake hands and begin a performance. It feels like connection because the roles line up. The tempo of behavior matches, the opinions agree, the wounds mirror. But this is not friendship. It is compatibility of illusions. It is unconscious resonance, shadows recognizing shadows, fears recognizing fears, insecurity finding security in someone equally uncertain. Only when a person goes through transformation, through crisis, heartbreak, loneliness, ambition, silence, do they begin to peel the layers off their psychology. There comes a moment when the old self dies. The performances become exhausting. The persona cracks under pressure. The shadow demands recognition. The inner voice becomes louder than the outside voices. This is the beginning of individuality, what Jung called individuation, the journey into the self. After this journey, the world looks different. The friendships that were once enough now feel small. The conversations that once felt deep now sound hollow. The external validation that once defined your identity now feels irrelevant. You begin to search for something that can hold the weight of truth, not the comfort of acceptance. And that is when you realize how rare real friendship is, because very few people are willing to abandon the mask. A real friend is not someone who agrees with you. Agreement is easy. It is not someone who shares your hobbies or tastes or background. Similarity is accidental. A real friend is someone who can sit with your truth without needing to reshape it for their comfort. They do not feel threatened by your growth, intimidated by your ambition, or offended by your honesty. They can witness the parts of you that are unfinished, unpolished, even contradictory, and choose to stay, not because it flatters them, but because it is real. Real friendship requires two awake minds, and that is the rarest combination. An awake mind is one that has seen its own darkness and learned not to project it onto others. It has faced jealousy, envy, inferiority, and refused to let those impulses drive behavior. It has seen how easily love becomes possession, how quickly admiration becomes comparison, how fast support becomes resentment, and decided to rise above it. An awake mind is humble, not performatively but existentially, because it has collapsed under its own illusions before and knows the cost of ego. Two awake minds do not use each other as mirrors. They use each other as windows into new territory of thought, new possibilities of identity, new landscapes of potential. They do not feed each other's insecurity. They challenge it. They do not protect each other from discomfort. They invite it when it leads to growth. The friendship is not a shelter from the world. It is a laboratory where the soul experiments with becoming more. That is why real friendship feels different. There is no competition because the identities are self-sustained. There is no emotional dependency because solitude has been mastered. There is no manipulation because motives are conscious. There is no need to control because both understand the fragility of freedom. The bond is not built on needing each other, but on choosing each other every day with awareness, without contract. Most friendships break under the weight of honesty. A person reveals a truth about themselves, a painful truth, a strange truth, a new dream, and the other withdraws. They say things like, "You've changed," but what they mean is, "You are no longer shaped by my expectations." Real friendship is the opposite. Change is welcomed, even celebrated. Evolution is not a threat. It is the point. Two awake minds know that stagnation is death disguised as comfort. Jung said that the greatest act of love is to allow another person to be themselves, not the version we want, but the truth they are becoming. This is what conscious friendship looks like. There is room for silence, room for distance, room for reinvention. A real friend does not panic when the other disappears to build something in solitude. They understand the sacredness of that journey because they have taken it themselves. The rarity comes from this. Very few people have faced themselves deeply enough to offer others freedom. Most cling, most project, most demand, most love with conditions tied to their own insecurity. Stay close, Stay familiar. Stay predictable. Real friendship demands the opposite. Go far, go deep, go strange, go where your soul leads. And I will meet you there if and when our paths align. You can recognize a real friend by the quality of your conversations. They are not gossip, not performance, not shared complaint. They are exploration of ideas, of fears, of purpose. Each conversation leaves you expanded, not emptied. You do not feel drained after seeing them. You feel lighter in the mind, sharper in thought, more yourself. They do not try to fix you. They do not try to save you. They witness. And witnessing is one of the highest forms of respect. Two awake minds create a relationship without ownership. There is no hierarchy because the currency is not ego, but truth. There is no silent accounting of favors because support is given freely. There is no competition for significance because each person has found significance internally. The friendship becomes a mirror of potential, showing what the human connection can be when the unconscious is not directing every motive through hidden need. It is rare because it requires maturity, psychological, emotional, spiritual. It requires the courage to lose people, to outgrow versions of yourself that once attracted crowds, to accept that the path of individuation is lonely, not because the world rejects you, but because the world is asleep. When you wake up, your world shrinks and deepens. Fewer people remain, but those who do carry entire galaxies inside them. In the end, real friendship is not about proximity, frequency of contact, or social rituals. It is about recognition, one soul recognizing another beyond the mask, beyond the story, beyond the personality. Two awake minds don't need each other to feel whole. They meet because they are whole. They do not exchange identities. They exchange horizons. That kind of friendship is rare because it requires two miracles: the rebirth of the self in one person and the rebirth of the self in another, at the same time, in the same lifetime, with enough awareness to recognize the miracle when it appears. Everything else is noise. Everything else is dependency wrapped in affection. Everything else is performance wearing the costume of friendship. Real friendship is the moment where two journeys cross, two awakenings converge, and two individuals choose to walk beside each other, not because they must, but because they can. It is rare, but when it happens, it changes everything.